Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of working on our Bluetooth speaker box here. We're coming off of the last video where we glued up our box, and this is how I left off with it from the last video. It has certainly had plenty of time to dry, so we're going to get right into it, and I'm going to start carefully peeling off the tape. I'm going to take the rubber bands off. What we're going to focus on today is what steps you need to do post glue up, which is first doing what I'm doing right now and taking off your tape. You can just ball it up once you take it off. It doesn't need to be saved. So I'm gonna get a little ball of tape going here, and when I get to taking off the main pieces, I'm just gonna go a little slow around the corners to hopefully not have any tape tear out. Some of it might get stuck because of the glue, but if it does, it'll come off when you start sanding it, so it's not a big deal. And you might feel it grab a little bit harder around the corners, and that's also probably just some glue that might have squeezed out. And this is coming off pretty cleanly, which is good. Oh, I jinxed myself. There's a little strip there. Let's see if we can save it. Nope, a little bit there. I know this is exciting to watch. All right, one more piece to go. And then we'll get into talking about the sanding. All right, so I'm just gonna ball up that tape and throw it over there. And I'm just gonna take a look at how it came together. I'm actually really happy with how this came together. The corners look nice and tightly clamped together. There's a little bit of glue that's squeezed out, which we're gonna sand. I would say the most heavy buildup that I have is on this corner right here. I'm gonna hold it to the side and maybe you can see it's a little bit lifted. That's gonna sand away. If you had yellow Titebond glue, the glue is gonna be more visible to you. If you had white Elmer's glue in your kit, that glue dries clear. So it might not be as visible, but if you do your sanding like you should, it should all come off without much of an issue. But everything came together nicely in the corners. And then looking at it from a front view, the corners are relatively flush. One side might be sticking out a little bit higher than the other in some cases, but I'm going to show you how we're going to sand that and level that off as well. At this point, though, just want to note why it was important that we sanded these poplar pieces ahead of time, because at this point, now that it's glued up, it would be super difficult to get the sandpaper in to all of those crevices. Same with inside the strip of cherry on the front and back. So let's get into sanding the outside of the box, okay? We are at this point going to start with 100 grit, and we're going to use our sanding block, okay? So you'll take your 100 grit, wrap it around your sanding block as tight as you can, and kind of hold it like this. I use my thumb on one side and my other three fingers on the other. index finger up top so I can get some pressure. And before you actually start this, this time I do recommend doing the pencil mark method. Just some light squigglies on all four sides. Like so. Just so you can track your progress. When we do the surfaces here, you can kind of, instead of squigglies, I'm just going to do some marks kind of like this going around. And I'm going to show you just kind of the technique, and I'm only going to do it with 100 grit for the video. So that, I mean, once you see it with 100 grit, you get the idea. I'm not going to bore you with doing every single grit because it's repetitive. So, and as you go through the higher grits of paper, I would go lighter with your pencil marks because the finer the grit of sandpaper, the tougher it's going to be to remove those pencil marks. So I have it marked here. I have it marked on all four surfaces, turning it around, and on the other side. We are not going to do any sanding to the poplar pieces whatsoever. We are not going to do any sanding to the inside lip of the cherry because we already did that. Okay, so let's get started. I have my sanding block. I have my 100 grit sandpaper. The most important thing with this is that you go with the grain of the wood. Can't stress that enough. Just always look at the lines in the wood. That will tell you what direction to go. So even this one, even though it's kind of squiggly here, it's mainly going in this direction. What you don't want to do is go front to back like this because you will put really, really bad scratches in the wood, and it's going to show up when you put finish on the box. So I'm going to hold with one hand, and I'm going to start sanding with the other. And I want to make sure I'm keeping the sanding block flat on the piece, and I want to make sure that I'm shifting from side to side so that I'm sanding evenly, right? I don't want to do more sanding on this side versus the other. I want to keep it moving so that I'm going evenly. You could turn it in this direction and work like this. I just find it to be more comfortable to have it going this way, but whatever's more comfortable for you is fine. I would work over a surface that you don't mind getting dusty, because it's going to get dusty. And if you remember from the other video when you were sanding the more delicate parts, I was really stressing not to go crazy with your sanding, not take too much material. This is more forgiving because it's the outside surface, so you can be a little more bold with your sanding here. Okay, so that looks pretty good for that surface. I'm going to turn it, try to quick do the other. Now you might notice in some of your pieces, and I just noticed it on this piece, this little divot here, and that actually happened from the planer. When these ran through the planer, sometimes the machine will make dips in the wood like that. You can do one of two things. It's a little unsightly. It's kind of annoying to see. you can keep sanding until it levels out. Honestly, that's going to be a lot of sanding. So what you could also do is kind of lightly mark it. And that part, I'm just going to fold this a little bit. Still go with the grain, but you can use your finger and do this by hand to kind of get in to where it dips down. For me personally, that dip only happened on, looks like, one of the pieces. So I'll probably just make that the bottom of the speaker box and not really worry about it too much. So that's another little tip there. So I'm going to quickly do the other two sides. And then I'm just going to show you how we're going to do the front and back edges. And that will wrap things up. And of course, if your arm gets tired, take some breaks. Don't kill yourself over this. Don't go crazy. Okay. All right. So obviously we would continue and repeat the process. Whoops, got one more side. But we're going to repeat the process for 120 grit, 150 grit, 180 grit, and 220 grit. And you will get this thing super, super smooth and looking really nice. Okay. So, that looks good for the 100 grit. Excuse me. Now I just want to show you what you can do for sanding these edges. I would recommend still using the sanding block. That way you don't, if you do it by hand, you run the risk of kind of rounding over your corners and making them kind of sloppy looking. What you want to do though is kind of just use the edge of the sanding block like this. You can keep it a little bit further in just so you can balance it. But you don't want to just plop it down like this, because then here and here you're going to be sanding against the grain. So I just want to keep it relatively flat. And this step should go quickly. Pretty much after just a few passes, your pencil mark should be gone. And you should also start to feel if it was uneven between the two corners, this should level it out really quickly. So then you can just rotate it. Do the same thing. I'm staying with the grain. Okay. And do this corner. Again, this is one that you want to try not to go too crazy with, so that we don't make things lopsided. You can even see kind of the end is sometimes catching in here, so I can try to keep the block a little more centered. If it happens, it's okay. Okay, so the corners look good. They look nice and even. And so I would then go to the other side, do the same thing. I'm not going to show you that because it's repetitive. It's the same thing. The last thing I'm going to show you, and this is a step that you would do with 220 only. This is what you're going to wait to do this until you've sanded everything with 120, 150, 180, and 220. The last thing you're going to do is soften all of your corners, all of your edges. And this is just a very light sanding so that you don't have these sharp corners. And the reason for that is when we put the mineral oil on, the finish won't really stick to sharp corners. It'll kind of flake off if it gets into a corner. So we're just going to soften them a little bit, and it also makes it a little bit smoother to the touch so you don't have these sharp surfaces. So the way we're going to do that is just by hand. You can take the sandpaper in your hand like this and hold it kind of at a 45-degree angle like this, and just very lightly sand back and forth. And as you sand back and forth, you can kind of tilt your paper to kind of roll the edge a little bit. And that is about all you need. And I don't know if the camera will show it as well, but all you're doing is kind of just softening that edge a little bit, and it just gives it a nice feel for when you hold it and when we put a finish on it. So you're going to want to do that to all of these surfaces here, the outer surfaces here. I would do it very lightly to the corners here, very lightly. You don't want to round it over, but you just want to soften it. Okay, so these corners. And then lastly, if you want to, you don't have to, but I'm probably going to very carefully soften the inside corner here. And I'll do that just with my finger kind of getting in there like this. To me, it's just a nice touch to kind of show that you take attention to detail. It's kind of a nice finishing touch there. And it's just a matter of a couple passes back and forth, just like that. Okay. So, just to review, when your box comes out of the tape and the rubber bands, you're going to peel all of that off carefully. We are starting with 100 grit, marking your surfaces in pencil and sanding your surfaces, making sure you go with the grain, not against it. We are not sanding the poplar at all. We are not sanding the inside surfaces of the cherry. And we're going to sand these surfaces with 100 all the way to 220. And we're going to do the same for these surfaces, 100 all the way to 220. And last but not least, with 220 grit only, we are going to soften the corners to make them smooth to the touch. All right, so thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next video.